Hello and welcome to this afternoon's session on inclusive design. I think we might just give it one more minute for anybody who's trying to log on last minute, and then we'll start the presentations. There's going to be two presentations this afternoon. The first is by myself, Lucy Plumridge from HLM Architects, talking about designing for autism and inclusive design. And the second presentation is going to be by Eilish Drake of Drake Harrigan. Both those presentations should take roughly about 20 minutes each, which should hopefully give us some time at the end for some questions. I think if we start the presentation, hopefully you can see the first slide going through. I apologise now for any technical issues. This is a whole new system and platform for us. So, according to the Department for Statistics, about 15% of school students have a special educational need. And the most common type of these SENs are autistic spectrum disorder, moderate learning difficulties, and physical disabilities. Now, the requirements of physical disabilities are now standard within education design through things like the building regulations and DDA requirements. However, the needs for students with other special educational needs, especially those on the autism spectrum, are often overlooked because of their complexity and bespoke nature. Now, figures vary, but between about 1 to 1.5% of the population is thought to be on the autism spectrum, and the numbers are actually rising. And an higher than average proportion of these students do go on to higher education, representing about 2.4% of HE students in the UK. However, figures show that only about 40% of these students successfully complete their courses, compared to an average completion rate of about 90%. Now, this could be due to many factors, but ASD students typically have issues with communication, particularly difficulty coping with change, which could reading body language, which is exacerbated by poor social inclusion, and can you design spaces that help students with autism get the most out of their education? Now, people with autistic spectrum disorder can vary wildly in their abilities, which is why it is a spectrum. 50% have a learning disability with an IQ lower than 70, but the spectrum also includes high-functioning autism and Asperger's syndrome, which is thought to affect about 70 in 1,000 people. Now, students can exhibit heightened visual spatial function, often shown in the fields of engineering, architecture, and the sciences, and they include some of the most talented and creative minds that have shaped our world to date. People like Darwin, Einstein, Mozart, Bill Gates, and Steve Jobs are all thought to have had autism. So what we need to do is create environments that nurture all students through all stages of education by really understanding and responding to their needs. Now, the reality for many students with autistic spectrum disorder and high-functioning autism is that education presents a bewildering array of emotional, physical, practical, and social, and communicative and sensory challenges. It's been described by Temple Grandin as seeing the world through a kaleidoscope and trying to listen to a radio that's jammed on static at the same time. Add to that a broken volume control, which causes the volume to jump erratically from a loud boom to almost inaudible. People with ASD can exhibit a wide range of behaviours, but typically about 95% of them struggle to process information from several senses at once, which can be manifested as either hypo or hyper sensitivity to things like smell, sight, taste, sound, and touch. So in Living with Autism, Pretending to be Normal, Leanne Holiday Wiley wrote, "I found many noises and bright lights nearly impossible to bear. They disarm my calm and make my world very uninviting. Together, the sharp sounds and bright lights were more than enough to overload my senses." So simple things that we can ignore present significant challenges to ASD students. Sounds such as vacuum cleaners, car horns, or simply the hum of building services can be incredibly disturbing. Visually, bright colours, strong patterns on surfaces, particularly stripes and intense artificial light, can be overstimulating and quite threatening. Smells such as perfume, the smell of food, and off-gassing and odours from furniture and carpets can also have an impact. So designers need to think really carefully about all aspects of building specification and operation when designing fully inclusive learning environments. Individuals can also exhibit repetitive and rigid behaviours and therefore prefer predictable environments that are easy to interpret. By understanding these responses, we can design spaces that support all students' needs. So the first thing to think about is what we call proxemics, and this is the measure of personal space around the body, which is slightly different in these current situations, but in most normal situations, kind of 0.5 metre is what's considered an intimate space. 0.5 metre to 1 metre is personal space for interactions with friends, family. So things like narrow corridors and doorways that force students into personal space with others can make them incredibly uncomfortable. 1 to 4 metres is the social space for interaction with acquaintances, and 4 metres plus is the public zone. But actually, for people on the autism spectrum, these spaces are much, much smaller. So what do we need to do in buildings? Well, if you can afford it, you need wide circulation spaces to limit that physical contact within the personal zone. You need generous room proportions with high ceilings to give a greater feeling of space, and also a choice of exits from rooms if possible. It's ideal to create or divide off smaller, what we call me spaces, of larger social spaces so students can feel like part of a wider group while preserving their sense of personal space. And it's also good to try and avoid spilling space or filling spaces to capacity, where students are forced to sit closely to other students. And this is found to be particularly important, as studies have shown that autistic spectrum disorder students are more sensitive to touch when in a learning environment than at home. So their reactions to proxemics are actually further magnified. Then we come on to compartmentalisation. So some students with autism have difficulty understanding what other people require of them and struggle to understand that other people have thoughts and feelings that might be different from their own. As a consequence, their responses and inputs can often be seen or read as inappropriate, adding to confusion, stress, and feelings of low self-esteem. So buildings that actually assist this by providing clear sensory clues to what's likely to be required of each person in a specific area can really help. To be clear on the functions of spaces through things like layout, design, furniture, and sensory environments such as acoustics. Spaces should express their functions and create different sensory environments such as quiet study, focused group learning, or more vibrant social spaces. Smaller me spaces also enable students to feel more enclosed and secure, which picks up on research from the 1970s by J. Appleton, who referred to the human need for prospect and refuge, this idea of being contained within an indoor space, but actually having the ability to have views out, providing people with a sense of place. Legibility is also key within the kind of wider context and school environment, creating elements in the landscape that provide sensory clues to space and function, including paths that give clearly defined routes and connections, and actually curved paths have been found to be better than linear ones, edges that allow students to follow routes, and zones that define the different functions of different areas. Node points can actually allow students to understand the transition from one of these different spatial characteristics to another and help them adjust. And landmarks can really help reinforce a student's sense of place. And all this is important because actually research has shown that contact with nature can boost the concentration of students, reduce stress, and increase focus. So in simple buildings like this, we've used curved forms that gradually lead the students up to entrances, and changes in external materials can be used to signify different areas of the building to provide different visual clues. Movement is another important aspect, so spaces should have easy, non-confrontational movement around them, with minimal physical barriers, doors and thresholds where possible. Moving around a building causes all students to encounter all sorts of stimuli, transition movements and thresholds that can be particularly hard for people on the autistic spectrum. So try to create spaces that seamlessly flow, provide natural, logical wayfinding, with opportunities of finding personal space off them, so students can separate themselves from the hustle and bustle of student life when they feel they need to. Then there's the idea of transparency. People inherently want to see a space before they actually enter it, to help them understand the lay of the land. And once there, they also need to be clear on how they can leave that space or find a place within it where they feel secure. So transparency into spaces through floor-to-ceiling windows, side lights, glazed panels and doors all help reduce stress and anxiety of students. And visual connections to nature also provide a positive impact on cognitive, psychological and physiological responses in the body. They can reduce stress and lower the blood pressure. So try to exploit relationships to external landscapes wherever possible. Very few studies have actually looked at preferences of colour in students with autism spectrum disorder, but I did find one, which took boys aged between 4 and 17 with ASD and compared their colour preferences to other students. And they were asked to rank their preferences in each group. And they found that those students with ASD preferred greens and neutral colours. And it's thought the hypersensation in ASD students can cause sensory overload when actually viewing strong colours, such as yellows, bright whites, oranges and reds. So in general, low arousal colours should be used, such as creams, soft greens and blues, and patterns and stripes should be avoided, as these can exacerbate OCD behaviour. In terms of materials, they can also affect students' engagement in their learning environment and their ability to relax and pay attention. For example, the use of natural materials such as timber can lower students' heart rate and reduce anxiety. And this is particularly important, as we already touched on, students with ASD are hyper or hyposensitive to touch. Sensory zoning, which is the organisation of spaces according to their sensory quality, rather than typical functional zoning, is also important. This requires group spacing according to their stimulus levels. So high stimulus, such as social learning spaces, cafes, breakout areas, are all things that can be clustered together. And then you get low stimuli spaces, such as quiet study, reflection spaces, me spaces, and there's transitional zones between them, aid that shift from one type of space to another. High stimuli spaces can be overwhelming for some students, so provide more self-contained areas off these with lowered ceilings and more acoustic control. For example, multiple groups of students working together in an active learning environment may generate too much noise or movement for some students with ASD. Therefore, quieter zones can be provided through the use of screens or recesses, which then allow flexibility and adaptability of the space going on. In terms of open plan cafes, these can be equally overwhelming, and the resultant smells can be extremely disturbing for ASD students. So create a range of seating, including individual seats and acoustic booths, to give students choices of where they want to sit, and work carefully with the M&E engineers to optimise ventilation and create enclosed environments. And then we've touched on transition spaces. Now, these are spaces that support both spatial sequencing and sensory zoning and allow students to recalibrate their senses as they move from one level of stimuli to another. And they can take on a variety of forms. They can be anything from a node point along a circulation space to a full sensory room, a kind of breakout space that allows students to take a moment out from the busy hustle and bustle of student life. So often the transitional or traditional classroom or lecture theatre is a kind of place of routine, safety and predictability for students. Beyond the classroom, the circulation and breakout areas are actually the spaces that are more stressful, noisy and surprising sometimes. Therefore, a transition space into a teaching space can act as a quiet seating area and is useful to help students adapt to going into new areas. And then we touched on things like escape and refuge spaces, and these provide respite for the autistic user from overstimulation in their environment. Now, these can be partitioned off areas that allow students to sit quietly and refocus, or they can simply be upholstered seating that moderates sound and have minimum stimulation. But I would suggest not doing them in white and vibrant yellow, as we've touched on, these colours can, or green even, these colours can be particularly disturbing for students on the spectrum. And then we have visual triggers, such as natural and artificial light, which are shown to be particularly significant impact on the behaviours of students with ASD, as they're particularly sensitive to changes in light. Most fluorescent lights actually have a flicker, not visually perceived by most, that can actually exacerbate repetitive behaviours. And therefore you need to make sure that you use high frequency ballast lighting or LED, and use dimmers to moderate light when required within spaces. Windows should ideally be kept only on one wall to avoid overstimulation and distraction, and glare should be carefully controlled through matte surfaces on desks, looking at window coverings, and even simple things like tilting wall whiteboards by 5 degrees has been shown to actually have an effect. So the National Autism Society suggests that slatted blinds, particularly vertical ones, should be avoided though, as these can be incredibly distracting. But the most significant influence on behaviour is actually acoustics. So research published in the International Journal of Constructed Environment has shown that reducing noise levels and reverberation in spaces for children with autism improved their attention spans, in some instances tripling it, and reduced their response times by up to 60%. Therefore, acoustic controls should vary according to the level of user focus required. For example, a study space should have a high level of acoustic control and be a low stimulus space, and then gradually adjusting to more lively environments as you move away from that to more breakout spaces. And students can be particularly sensitive to noise, things like background noise of mechanical systems, and even things like adjacent conversations. So you can use things like pink noise, which has been shown to have a positive impact and help in areas where there's lots of diverse activities going on, such as large social teaching spaces. So just to summarise, these are some of the key aspects that we've touched on. The simple measures that you can take to make learning environments more inclusive. Proxemics, so considering the physical distance around students as they move through space, and also as they physically sit within spaces. Compartmentalisation of different activities within that. Clear legibility of the different functions of spaces, and really consider movement. You know, this is one of the most stressful times within it. So then you have refuge spaces, transparency and use of colour, the use of materials, and acoustic design. So I think that's the end of that presentation, but I need to remind you that if you have any questions, if you'd like to post them on the attendees questions list, we'll try and come to those at the end of the presentation. So if I can now hand over to Alex Drake to talk about her subject, if all this works.
Hi, Lucy. Thank you. Okay, just bear with me for a second now. Okay. Okay, are you seeing that, Lucy?
Yes, I can see that slide.
Okay, so I'll go ahead then. I'll just set my timer here, in case I'm running on. So thank you very much. Delighted to be contributing to the webinar today. I'm Ailish Drake from Drake Horrigan Architects, and today I'm just going to take you through two projects to show you how, I suppose, we as architects have tried to create buildings that foster inclusion. And I suppose I want to kind of go back to thinking about the school ethos and how, as an architect, you can reflect the school ethos in the way that you design. So I'm just starting with this quote about from the Salamanca Statement, which says that that the children with disabilities should attend the neighbourhood school, the school that their sisters and brothers attend, their friends and their cousins. And I think that really is a key part of trying to include everybody in the education system. And the department have been working very hard to do that and to create spaces and environments where children can attend the same school as their siblings. So with the school ethos, I mean, every school is different, and I know all schools want to welcome everyone, but we work on a lot of different school projects, and it's really important to understand how that school works and what that school ethos is. So how do you do that? You do that really by talking to the principal, getting to know the staff, sitting down with them, going to the school during the day, learn about the working day of the school, learning how children use the spaces in the existing school, when they arrive at school, how they leave school, and all those sorts of things are really important to kind of feed in to what kind of a building the school needs. And I suppose I'm talking specifically today really about extending existing school buildings and integrating additional needs accommodation into the existing mainstream school setting. So I'm going to take you through Unreact. It's an extension to Scoil Cruishreen Caherdavin in Limerick, and this school extension won the RIAI Public Choice Award last year, and has won a number of education awards. So the school ethos is really, it's multicultural, multi-ethnic, it's a highly inclusive school, and I think that really was the key central idea of the design and how we extended it. Their principal, Pat Milan, is very energetic, and this whole atmosphere of welcoming and inclusion really just emanates from him and from all of the staff in the school. So how can buildings foster inclusion? So we start really with the site and where you can locate an extension. So obviously existing buildings can be difficult, and integrating additional needs accommodation can be difficult in an existing setting, because a lot of our schools were, you know, like some of them are quite old. This one I'm talking about now was built in the 1970s. And sometimes it can be quite tricky to integrate additional accommodation, and any accommodation, whether it's for children with additional needs or not, it can be difficult to integrate in such a way that children feel comfortable and they can find their way around the school. So you have to look at where you locate your extension. You have to look at how children arrive. Is it accessible? Can you create spaces for a spontaneous connection between children, parents, people picking up children, and all that sort of thing? And where do you enter the school? Because what we find is when we go out to schools, often the main entrance, because there's been a number of extensions over the years, the main entrance gets lost. There's very unclear wayfinding, and this is a big problem for schools that have been extended over the years. And then when you enter the building, what's the space like when you arrive? And I mean, Lucy talked about, the need for good, spacious buildings. And that can be a problem for schools, because every space is used up. You know, people, they're always short on space. They're always needing more space to do resource teaching and all that sort of thing. So it can all get eaten into, and it can be very difficult to get funding to get additional circulation space within a building. So when you arrive, you need to be able to incorporate social spaces for people to mingle, to wait to meet the principal, to connect with each other, to orientate themselves. And you also need to think about the security. On entering a school, who do you meet? Is there a friendly face to help you? And these are very important things, especially for children and parents of children with additional needs. So I think schools are much happier places now than maybe they were when I was in school. But and we can see that kids are really suffering at the moment because they can't go to school. And school is where they have all their friends and they socialise and they play and they connect with their teachers. And I know that the kids are really, really missing that at the moment. And especially children, with additional needs, they're missing the structure of the day. And I think during this time, it is really evident how important school is. And how do you make that a happy environment? Obviously through the school ethos and the teachers and all of that they do for the children, but also can you design that into it? And I think that you can design spaces that are happy, spaces that are easy to find your way around, incorporating nice places to sit, to play, to connect with people. And the use of light and texture in the materials, the colours that you bring into the school. And of course, connecting the indoors to the outdoors is hugely important as well. So this is Scoil Cruiserie as it existed, as it was built in the 1970s. And this school was designed on a sloping site. So the junior school is quite a bit lower than the senior school. And before we did our extension, the school worked in quite a chaotic sort of way in terms of how you found your way around. So the school entrance wasn't very obvious, and you can see the entrance comes up there from the main road. But the two schools were linked internally by a general purpose space, which meant that if something was happening in the general purpose space, children actually had to go outside the school and go between one school and the other outdoors. In the mornings and the evenings, children would leave from different parts of the school because the entrance wasn't big enough to cater for people all entering together. So there was difficulties already with wayfinding and access to the school before we looked at adding on accommodation. And the site was quite constrained as well. So you can see the blue there is actually the play yard to the rear of the school, and the pink was just a grassed area to the front of the school. So they really were our two options in terms of identifying a location for the additional accommodation. So we opted to put the additional accommodation to the front of the school, and there was a few reasons for this. It allowed us to put a new entrance to the school so that everybody arrived at the same entrance, and it allowed us to connect the new classrooms with the senior school and the junior school, so that the school benefited now from a new connecting atrium at its centre. So you can see that here. So we made a public realm space to the front of the building to bring you up to the new entrance. And in green there, you can see the connective atrium space. And this was really a key space in terms of the how people moved around the school. So everybody arrives into that space in the morning, and everybody moves through that space during the course of the day. Children who use the additional needs classrooms, many of them also use the mainstream classrooms. So they orientate themselves through the atrium, and they move between their classrooms and the mainstream classrooms as well. So I suppose the thing is with the children in the school, they all have very different needs. The two new classrooms accommodate 6 children in each, so 12 children altogether. But the children vary in age from juniors right up to 6th class. So each child has different needs, and some children, as I said, will be going back into mainstream during the day, and some children will need to use the other rooms that are support spaces. So effectively, that atrium space in the middle really becomes kind of a community space for the school, and that's where parents and grandparents hand over children in the morning, and where they come to collect them in the evening. And this is the plan of the school. Sorry, I better speed up. I see my time is ticking away. So as I said, you have the public space, the courtyard space to the front. As you arrive, you enter into the atrium space, and from there then you connect into the junior school on the left, to the senior school at the top of the page, and then on the right and to the bottom is the additional needs classrooms. And then the idea of these social spaces.
Just sorry to interrupt. I think we'll be fine for time.
Sorry?
I was just saying, sorry, I think we'll be fine for time, so don't worry about running over slightly.
Oh, grand. Thanks, Lucy. So you can see here how the social spaces work. So we've created a social space as you arrive at the school, and I'm going to show you some photographs now in a moment. You enter into the atrium school, which is your first social space, and then when you go into the additional needs accommodation, you have the central activity space again, which is located central, and that connects out to a garden space at the back, which is the sensory garden space. And while the central activity space is part of the accommodation for the children with additional needs, it also can be used by the mainstream children, and it also can be used by the community. So, for example, if there's a grandparents' day, they can have teas and coffees inside in the central activity space. So it depends really on how the school want to organise their day, but the spaces are there for people to use. And I think this idea of this kind of spontaneous connection is so central to the design, that we've tried to create little areas where children can sit and they can connect with each other, but also that the whole school extension is almost something for the whole community to enjoy. And here are some cross sections through it. So the section on the top is the cross section through the public realm space as you enter the building, and below you can see a section through the public realm space, through the central activity space, and out into the garden. So the site was quite sloped right down to the road, and we've ramped, put in ramps there to make it fully accessible. And I suppose we've used the levels in the building as well to kind of create sort of differences in space. So you'll see when we move on to the central activity space, it's stepped down, as you can see there in the section at the centre of the plan. And as you move out to the sensory garden, the garden moves, it's stepped up along the hill, and that's all part of the kind of charm of the outdoor space. So this is the school as you arrive to it, and the facade, because the classrooms are really orientated towards the sensory garden, we don't have a lot of fenestration on the street side, and that really comes back to acoustics as well, and distraction and stimulation and all that sort of things. And also you have a para-education room and a multisensory room. The multisensory room doesn't have any windows on it. So we tried to play with the facade then to kind of give it a little bit of undulation, so that it's a nice and friendly, and it's not, it doesn't feel too closed off to the street. And then you enter into the public space to the front of the school. Okay, so this then is the courtyard to the front of the school, and what we've shown here, what we've tried to do here is create a place where people can wait, and children can sit around in the mornings before they come in, and parents can chat. And it was really nice to see the school when it was opened and when people started to do that. So when you arrive at 3 o'clock, it is very active, and the moms are sitting on the bench, and they have their buggies and all the rest rest up waiting, and they're all chatting, and often you get the grandparents who sit inside in the atrium building, and you might get the dads who are sitting over on the wall, and that's funnily, you know, how it kind of works. I suppose the other thing to say, with the classrooms that are for the children with additional needs, they can also be accessed directly from this space if children don't want to go through the atrium. So if a child is upset, there is also a door to the side from the same space that they can access it. That's the door there, actually. And I think parents find that quite good, because sometimes a parent might want to come in and talk to a teacher, and they may not want their child to know they're there, and they can use that. And I think the idea really is all about giving choice to parents and making life as easy as possible for everybody. And this is how the principal described the atrium space. As he said, agog with life, energy and chat, as big, little and small all mingle and mix in the most pleasant of settings. And I think that again goes back to the ethos of the school. It's very, very open. People are, you know, encouraged to come in and to meet each other. And I think it's very much a community thing, you know. So that's the atrium space there. Obviously, my photographs have been taken without people in them, but you can see the built-in seating, and on the left you have the wall actually of the old school. So that's actually the gym inside, and then we have incorporated natural ventilation into that space, and that connects all of the parts of the school. And then as you move through then into the central activity space, again, I suppose the idea here was that the project is designed without corridors, so that children don't feel that they're going down narrow corridors, and that once somebody arrives in this space, you can see every part of the space. You can see who's coming down, you know, who's walking against you and so on. So it's very, very open. And again, with the colour and the materials, we've used quite a bit of timber, because it has that sort of homely sort of feel to it, and we've used the pale creams, greens and blues, which are the good colours to use. And we wanted to put some colour into the building, and I think the children wanted that and the teachers wanted that as well. And you can see down at the far end that where the central activity space opens directly out onto the sensory garden. That's just it from another angle there. And the classrooms then themselves, both of the classrooms open with bifold doors out onto this garden. And the garden has been sort of a huge success of the project in a way. I mean, this photograph was taken when the garden was just put in, but it's in full bloom now, and it's such a pity that the children are in school at the moment. But in terms of going back into the school to see how they're using it, the teachers have found that the children absolutely love the garden, and they use it as a reward. So if they want the kids to sit down and, you know, get something done that might be quite difficult, you know, for 20 minutes or half an hour, they can say, well, then you can go out and you can use the garden. And it has been, you know, it really does encourage them. And one child in particular, his mom asks that he goes out and runs around the garden every day, because it just that connection with the nature and the ability to be able to run out in the fresh air means that he comes home a much happier child. There's some more photographs of that. And we use the colours in the garden as well. Obviously, you know, there wasn't a huge budget for it, but the idea was that we tried to get in the seating and the planting. And before I finish, I'll just quickly show you another small project, just to show you the same ideas done in a different way. So this little project it was a 2-classroom school, and they have an additional classroom, which is the port cabin that you can see on the right hand side. And they now have 1 class for children with additional needs. And in this case, we have to extend to the rear of the school, but because the school is so small, it's much easier to deal with the idea of everybody coming into the centre space. So again, with this one, what we've tried to do is use the allocated circulation space to create a social space in itself. So you enter into the school, you will say, the school, the new extension is orientated to the south, and we have a play yard connected to the circulation space, and we have a sensory garden on the left, directly accessed from the classroom. And you can see then that this on entering the school, it's always very important to think about how reception is planned, and how who meets you on entering a school, that you have this friendly face to meet you. So we've connected the new space directly with the reception space and out onto the playground. So all of the children will come out via that yellow circular space on the drawing there into the play yard. And that's just the elevation of it. And again, trying to, obviously it's south facing, so we've bring in a canopy and put in some seating so that the yard is usable throughout the year. And there are just some models of it there. So that's it. Thanks very much. Sorry, I ran a little bit over, and I'll just stop sharing the screen there now.
No, thank you very much. That was fascinating. Two projects going through. I think we're fine for time. I can't actually see any questions yet. I don't know if any of the audience have any questions they would like to ask now. I'm desperately looking at the attendees questions section, and nothing is coming up on the screen.
So somebody has a question there, Lucy. Oh no, is that a question? James Lee?
Well, how is the current situation? Can you see any questions? I can't, but
no.
I said, in terms of how is the current situation, and obviously the schools are shut down, do you think any changes they might need to make to go back?
Is that for me, Lucy? Yeah. I mean, I think that the one good thing about sorry, yeah, can you hear me? Okay, you can. Yeah. Yeah, sorry. So the one good thing about the additional needs accommodation is that it is a lot more spacious than normal mainstream school accommodation. So you have 6 children per classroom. So I think hopefully, for those children going back, they will be able to, have a little bit more space. But obviously it's going to be very difficult, and I presume it'll be down to the teachers and how they deal with it. Maybe they will have to stagger the classes or bring fewer children in at the one time. It is going to be difficult for them.
Yes, I suppose special educational needs do have the advantage that they naturally have far more space per student anyway, so actually that distancing is far easier than a mainstream school where you're trying to put 30 children in a quite tight space, all sat very close together, and you've got huge movement of pupils back and forth between different sessions, which is, I was reading this morning, some of the primary schools are saying they're not going back yet because they just haven't physically got the space to be able to provide students to suitably and safely distance. Has anybody got any other questions? If not, I suppose we'll draw this to a close, and thank you very much for your attendance. If you look at the website, there are lots of other events coming up. Please feel free to join them. I think that's probably it now. Nobody's coming up with any desperate questions. So I think we'll leave it there. Thank you very much for attending. Okay, bye.
Bye.